Hi everyone, in today's hobby video I'm going to show you my 5 top tips to make you a better miniature painter. Tip number 1. Invest in a hobby table lamp. The perfect light for painting is always going to be natural sunlight. But if you're painting after work like I am when the sun goes down, or your focused hobby room doesn't get much light into it, the ceiling lights aren't going to be good enough to help you paint your miniatures well. It may mean you miss a lot of the fine detail, or simply your eyes just have to work a whole lot harder if you're squinting to see the finer detail of the miniature. Illustrated simply, this is what it looks like when this Adeptus Custodes head is viewed just with the ceiling lights on. And now with the hobby lamp on, it's clear to see how much easier it is to pick out the detail of this miniature piece, and hence do a better job when you're painting. For me, this is all about making life as easy as possible. If you're going to invest hours, if not days or weeks, into painting miniatures, make things as easy as possible for your eyes. Make it nice and clear and easy to spot the detail. Don't invest a heap of money, they cost like 15 quid at best. And if for whatever reason you don't have enough space, you could just wear a headlamp, like I am here. Tip number 2. Don't be afraid to paint pieces individually. GW miniatures are tiny, and sometimes the pose of the model makes it hard to reach certain parts of your paintbrush. Or there could be some miniatures such as character models which you simply want to do a really good job. This obviously requires a way for you to hold the part in place without physically having to touch it. So the easiest way is to use a wine cork, some thin wire and some super glue. You'll first need to drill a hole through the individual parts. So like this Vostroyan Anvil Inventory head, you can see I'm using the 1mm drill bit by Citadel to drill through and create a cavity. Then I take a short piece of very thin wire and stick it into the wine cork as I'm doing here. Then I put some super glue on the head of the wire, and this eventually goes into the cavity of the model piece. You may be thinking that after you finish painting the individual piece, what do you do with the wire sticking out? From my experience, usually if you just wiggle it, it ends up coming out anyway. But worst case, you could just cut the wire off at the neck of this piece here, for example, and then stick it on as though nothing was there. Now, I'm not for a second mandating that if you're going to go and paint 60 conscripts, you do this individually for every single arm and head. But as I said before, if you're going to do maybe your top characters, do this for them. Or maybe even for Astra Militarum commanders, do all the heads. I think a key piece that makes a model look very special is their face and eyes. We'll come on to painting eyes in a little bit later, but if you can really double down on getting the model's face and eyes to look really good, it makes the model really stand out. Tip number 3. Get yourself a wet palette. The secret to a really clean, smooth paint job is to apply multiple thin coats of paint. Achieving this with a dry palette can be very challenging, as the paint slowly dries out on the palette. A wet palette retains moisture, which obviously will help keep the paint wet for longer. You can buy purpose-built ones, and they're actually not very expensive at all, but I like to go for a homemade job. Making your own is dead easy. You'll firstly need a sealable container, and I've opted for a Tupperware style sandwich box. Then within it you'll need some parchment paper or baking paper. This is what the paint will physically sit on. And the key thing here is actually that the moisture will slowly seep through the parchment paper and keep the paint nice and moist. You'll then need something to soak up some water. You can either use kitchen sponge, or I just opt for some kitchen paper. Then it's all about pouring in some water. And you can see here I'm pouring in a little bit, but not too much to make it drown. You want to make sure that all the paper is kept moist. And as you use the palette more and more, you'll need to actually top this up as time goes. Another key benefit of a wet palette also is that you can actually close it up and come back to the paint later. So this means you're not wasting a paint, and if you've mixed up a specific colour with different pots of paint, this can be preserved for longer. A small note on maintenance though, is that over time, be it many weeks, you may actually start to grow fungus or parts of Nurgle rot in your little wet palette. That's all good. You can just obviously swap out the paper and the parchment paper when things get too untidy. Tip number 4. Get yourself a soft bristle paintbrush to dust your miniatures. A pet hate of mine is when you notice that a bit of hair, dust, or a chunk of dried paint is stuck in the paint layers of your miniature. This can be super distracting and obviously impacts on how clean the paint job looks. Keeping your painting area clear of any dust and dirt is obviously going to be a good place to start. But I find to make sure that nothing is popping up on the actual model itself before painting is to use a soft bristle brush and dust it off like you would a feather duster. It's obviously something really easy to do, but will go a long way in giving your miniatures a very clean and smooth paint job. Tip number 5. Get yourself a high quality fine detail paintbrush. I use several brands of paintbrushes including Rebel, Army Painter, Tamiya and Citadel. These all work fine for the purposes I use for them, but for the high detail paintbrush I've gone with the Citadel Artificer Layer Extra Small Paintbrush. Now this is twice the price of a standard Citadel paintbrush, so not cheap at all, but I think it's a very worthy investment because I use this brush solely for edge highlighting and also for painting faces and eyes of miniatures. My logic here is I'm happy to use a lower quality brush that may lose its head quicker if I'm going to use it as dry brushing or base coating. But if I'm going to try and pick out the eye of a model, I want to make sure the brush I'm using has the very best head available. Not advertising for Citadel, but the artificial layer brush I've been using to paint eyes has lasted me many months of consistent use now, whilst other brushes I've used don't last that long at all. There are of course other brands that offer very high quality fine detail brushes, so by no means is Citadel the only one you could use. But the overall principle remains that if you're going to have a very fine detailed paintbrush, why not invest the money and get the best quality you can use to make life as easy as possible for you. So you have it, my 5 top tips that hopefully make you a better miniature painter. You can see by my models I'm a good painter, but by no means an excellent one. So if you've got any other tips and tricks you've got, please share them in the comments. My channel is a variety channel for everything Astra Militarum. So if you enjoyed this video, please feel free to subscribe. If you want to support me, you can do so with a like, subscribing, sharing this video, or via Patreon, where I've got a Patreon platoon set up. Hope to see you next time. Patreon platoon, sound off. Colour Sergeant DuPont, Guardsman Gibson, Guardsman Gilliam, Guardsman Hall, Guardsman Erdal, and Guardsman Mitchell, Guardsman Witten.